This right here is the new Nintendo 3DS XL. Time to review it. After the massive success that was the Nintendo DS, the Nintendo 3DS had some pretty big shoes to fill. Nintendo knew they wanted to stick with the DS idea for their next generation handheld console. But they also knew they had to have a new idea. Something that would wow the crowd. Something that made the people say, yes, I want that. Stereoscopic 3D was a really big thing back in 2011. And so Nintendo looked at that and they knew they had to capitalize on it. But they had one big hurdle to overcome. Nintendo knew people weren't really keen about wearing big ass, clunky glasses just to see 3D. They don't want that. They looked at that and they said, well, what if we remove the glasses and find a way to display 3D without the need for them? Well, knowing Nintendo and their strive for innovation, they found a way to do it. And in 2011, they revealed the Nintendo 3DS. Sporting graphical capabilities that were miles ahead of the DS, an analog stick, a built-in gyroscope, and of course, stereoscopic 3D without the need for glasses. People were very impressed with the 3DS. Except one thing, the launch price. The original 3DS launched for $250, while the original DS launched for $150. So a lot of people weren't really keen on spending that much money. But luckily, after a few price cuts, some upgraded models with the new line of 3DSs, which is what you see right here, and a slew of must-play titles, the 3DS was another hit for Nintendo, with 75 million units worldwide as of recording this video. So when it comes to consoles, I tend to be a late adopter. I didn't get my own 3DS until 2017. I was mainly looking for the new Nintendo 3DS, the regular model, not the XL one. But unfortunately here in the States, that one is a little hard to come by unless you're getting special editions. That's the one that has the interchangeable faceplates, which the XL model does not have. So after I gave up on the regular model, I started seeking out an XL model. And funny enough, even though I was looking for an original black version, the Galaxy Special Edition was actually cheaper. Yeah, I know, right? Usually that's the other way around. So because of that, I got myself the XL model of the Galaxy Special Edition, and I love it. It is awesome. I do kind of wish I had the regular new Nintendo 3DS model, but after using the XL model and having those bigger screens, I think I made a good decision. Plus, because I got the new version of the Nintendo 3DS, I can play some of the games that will only run on the upgraded model, plus the games that are updated to run on this model will run better. So let's take a closer look at this thing, shall we? So on the top of the system, we have a notification light. This will blink during various different operations, whether you get a friend request or if you have a game that just got done installing, and etc. We also have two cameras on the front. These will take stereoscopic 3D video as well as images, which is kind of cool. It's not the highest resolution in the world though, so it doesn't look the greatest, but hey, it's a camera and it works. Certain applications and games will also take advantage of these cameras for augmented reality, which is kind of cool. And of course, you can't forget that beautiful Galaxy artwork on the front. That is nice. Mwah! Beautiful. On the left side of the system, there's nothing. On the front of the system, we have the cartridge slot for 3DS games as well as DS games, because all models of the 3DS are luckily backwards compatible with DS games, which is awesome. That is such a nice feature to have. It is kind of odd that the cartridge slot is in the left-hand corner of the front of the system. I thought I would accidentally pop out the cartridges with my hand, but luckily it doesn't get in the way. We will also find the headphone jack, the stylus, because can't forget that, as well as the power button and the 3 indicator lights. This one's for power, this one's for charging, and this one's for wireless communications. On the right side of the system, there's nothing. On the back of the system, we have our L and R shoulder buttons. These can also be used to take photos, as you can tell by the icon right there. We'll also find our ZL and ZR buttons. They added these on the new models of the 3DS for additional functionality. We'll also find the wrist strap loop, the charging port. These two things right here, I believe that's for using the charging cradle. And finally, we have an IR sensor for communicating with other 3DS systems as well as accessories. On the bottom of the 3DS, we have the new Nintendo 3DS XL logo, the Nintendo logo, as well as other FCC nonsense. And unlike the original 3DS as well as the original 3DS XL models, the only way to access the SD card is to take off this back plate here, which is kind of annoying, but you know, it is what it is. On the inside of the system, we have two speakers, which actually sound pretty decent. We also have the volume gauge on the left side of the system. And on the right side, we have the stereoscopic 3D gauge. We will also find another camera, which this camera will only take 2D photos and videos, unfortunately. Right next to the camera, we'll also find the super stable 3D sensor. They added this in the new line of 3DS models. Essentially what it does is, a common complaint of the original 3DS models is if you tilt the system ever so slightly, it ruins the 3D illusion. So this sensor, it tries its best to track your head so it doesn't ruin the illusion. It works well enough, but you need sufficient lighting for it to actually work. If you're playing the system in the dark, it doesn't work all that well, unfortunately. But in the right situations, it works pretty good. We'll also find our circle pad, which yes, this does also work on DS games, which is awesome. So you don't have to use that crummy old D-pad. And speaking of the D-pad, here it is. Which, unlike on the Nintendo DS Lite, it's more clicky this time. Which, you know, it's fine. It's not the best D-pad I've ever used, but not the worst. It works, and that's the most important thing. We'll also find the home button to access the main menu during gameplay. We'll also find a little itty-bitty microphone right in the corner. We also have our start and select buttons, our A, B, Y, and X buttons, as well as the second analog nub. They added this in the new line of 3DSs, and I'm very glad they added it. It essentially works just like the IBM track pointers. I can't remember what the specific name is, but if you've ever used one of those, it works essentially the exact same way. The actual nub itself doesn't move, but it reads the pressure from your finger, depending on where you tilt it. It works well enough. I do kind of wish it was like the circle pad, where it was an actual analog stick, but at least you have a second pseudo analog stick. Finally. Because let me tell you, for certain games, that is really, really nice to have. Ooh, here comes my favorite part. We get to talk about specs. So, because I'm reviewing the new Nintendo 3DS, the specs are going to be completely different compared to the original models, so keep that in mind. So, for a CPU, it uses a quad-core ARM 11MP core processor clocked at 804 MHz, compared to a dual-core version of the same processor clocked at 268 MHz on the original model. For memory, the system is sporting 256 megabytes, double the RAM of the original model. 64 megabytes is dedicated to the OS, and also has 10 megabytes of VRAM compared to 6 megabytes on the original model. For internal storage, it has 1 gigabyte of internal flash memory. For the top screen, the new Nintendo 3DS uses a 4.88-inch IPS LCD display with a maximum resolution of 800 by 240. And then the bottom screen is a 4.18-inch resistive touchscreen LCD with a maximum resolution of 320 by 240. For a graphics chip, it uses a DMP Pika 200 graphics chip clocked at 204 MHz, compared to 133 MHz on the original model. For sound, all models of the 3DS use stereo speakers with pseudo surround sound capabilities. For connectivity, all models of the 3DS support 2.4 GHz 802.11b/g Wi-Fi as well as infrared, but on the new Nintendo 3DS models, they added NFC right in the touchscreen. For power, the new Nintendo 3DS XL model uses a 1750 mAh lithium-ion battery. 3DS games will get about 3.5 to 7 hours depending on what game you're playing. DS games will get between 7 to 12 hours, and sleep mode you'll get about 3 days on a full charge. And finally, the new Nintendo 3DS XL weighs 11.6 ounces. All right, it's finally time to turn on the system. And here's the main menu of the 3DS. It has a lot of similar elements to the DSi's main menu, but it adds way more features. So the top screen will display an icon depending on what you have highlighted on the bottom screen. As you can see, I have the game card icon highlighted, and it's Mario Kart 7. The top screen will also display information like if you're connected to the internet or if you have Street Pass enabled, your play coins, as well as how many steps you've tracked. Because the 3DS has a built-in gyroscope, and if you put it in sleep mode, it'll track your steps and give you play coins, which you can use in certain applications, which is really, really cool. It'll also display your date and time and battery percentage up here as well. And a little Easter egg is the microphone on the 3DS will pick up different sounds, and depending on how loud it is, it'll make the icons on the top screen spin around. And the louder the sound it is, the faster it spins around. So as you see here, if I yell into the mic, hello, hello. So that's a nice touch. So we have a variety of options here. On the top, you can change settings for your home screen, like changing the theme or decorating it with badges. You can also adjust the screen brightness, the auto brightness settings, the power save mode settings, turn wireless communications on or off, setting up Nintendo 3DS image sharing, amiibo settings. You can also jump straight to the eShop as well as the system settings from here as well. And you can also read the home menu manual and contact information. We also have other settings at the top of the screen. We can take game notes, our friend list, notifications for various applications, the internet browser, and Miiverse. Miiverse was basically Nintendo's very own social media platform, and it was awesome. Unfortunately, they shut it down, I think back in 2018 or 2019. I can't quite remember, but it's kind of a shame, but it was nice when it lasted. You can also change settings as to how the icons on the bottom screen display, whether you want them bigger or smaller. As you can see, you can make them really, really tiny or really, really big. The 3DS has a slew of built-in applications like a sound recorder, a meme maker, a camera, AR games, the Nintendo eShop for purchasing new games and applications, Face Raiders, which is a built-in game, Activity Log, download play for multiplayer with DS and 3DS content, Street Pass Me Plaza, system settings, health and safety information, and Nintendo Zone, which unfortunately has been discontinued for quite a few years now. Nintendo Zone was basically an extension of the DS download stations, where you could access content for third-party data and other services from a hotspot or download station. These would be spread across all of the United States, and I'm pretty sure they had them in other countries as well. I believe the service was also used for location-specific content for games, downloading demos, and I believe also for online multiplayer. I do kind of wish I would have been able to experience Nintendo Zone, but unfortunately there's really no way to experience it anymore. Oh well. Alright, let's talk about the games that I have, starting with my physical games. And that's it. That's all my physical games for 3DS. I don't have a lot, unfortunately. But luckily, because the 3DS is discontinued, game prices are starting to come down. And luckily, the eShop on 3DS still has deals every once in a while for 3DS games. So you can still find some good prices for 3DS games, whether you go with physical or digital. First up, we have Mario Kart 7. What can I say? It's a good Mario Kart game. The graphics are good. The stereoscopic 3D is impressive. It's got a decent selection of karts and characters. The track selection is kind of sparse, unfortunately. That's kind of the weak point about this game. And also the fact that it doesn't really add a whole lot in terms of new features. But, you know, it's still a good Mario Kart game. I do still recommend this one. Plus, you can still find online matches in this game in 2021. That's impressive. Luigi's Mansion Darkmoon. This is a fantastic sequel to Luigi's Mansion on the GameCube. The graphics are superb for the 3DS. It really takes advantage of stereoscopic 3D. It looks phenomenal. And the gameplay is just so much fun. Plus, I've heard it's got a pretty good co-op mode. If you're going to pick up a 3DS, you're a fool if you don't pick up Luigi's Mansion Darkmoon. Fun fact, the original Luigi's Mansion was actually going to have stereoscopic 3D because the hardware of the GameCube is technically capable of stereoscopic 3D. But, of course, back in 2001, 3D TVs were both very rare and very, very expensive, so they decided against that feature. Which is probably why they decided to make a sequel on 3DS as well as porting the original game on 3DS. That's just my guess, though. The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time 3D. In case you couldn't tell, this is a remake of The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time on the Nintendo 64, just with stereoscopic 3D, improved graphics, and a couple of additional features. And honestly, it's actually a pretty good remake. I haven't played a whole lot of this one, but take my word for it, from what I played, it's pretty damn good. There are some aspects about this remake that are pretty frowned upon by fans of the original game, but if you've never played Ocarina of Time before, this is a great way to experience it for the very first time. And finally, to round out the physical games, we have Super Mario 3D Land. This game takes full advantage of the 3DS's stereoscopic 3D, and it works really, really good. Any mainline Mario game is a must-have for any Nintendo system. And if you're picking up a 3DS, you must have 3D Land in your collection. Let's move on to my digital games. Starting off, we have Rage of the Gladiator. This was originally on the WiiWare service, but got ported to 3DS as well as iOS and Android. Can't remember when. I think it was 2011 or 2012. I can't quite remember. But it's actually a pretty good port. This game plays a lot like Nintendo's Punch-Out, if you've ever played it before, where you have to watch your enemies' cues and dodge their attacks and then go for the kill. It may not be anything original, but it's still a pretty good game. I do recommend it. I love me some Marble Blaster games, and Luxor is one of my favorites. It's a pretty good port on 3DS. Unfortunately, it only runs at 30 FPS, so it does feel a little sluggish at times. But, you know, what can I say? It's the original Luxor game, still intact, and it plays pretty darn good on 3DS. Wario Land 3, which is so far my only virtual console game that I've ever purchased on 3DS. I haven't played a whole lot of this game, but from what I've played and from what I've heard, it's a pretty good Wario Land game. I do recommend it. Swords and Soldiers 3D. I have this game on Wii U, and it's actually a pretty fun strategy game. Unfortunately, it does not run the best on 3DS at all. It is so choppy and so slow. It's kind of nauseating at times, especially for playing with 3D on. But, you know, the gameplay is still there, and that's all that matters. But if you really want to play the game portably, then yeah, pick it up on 3DS. Otherwise, just play it on PS3 or Wii U. Pokemon Shuffle. I have not played any of this game, so I can't really say anything about it. The only thing I can say about it is it's also on iOS and Android, I want to say. So, yeah. Not much I can say about it. Ironfall Invasion. This is only the demo version, but from what I played from the campaign, it's actually pretty fun and very graphically impressive for 3DS. This game takes full advantage of the new Nintendo 3DS hardware by allowing you to use the second analog stick, the ZL and ZR buttons on the back, as well as running at 60 frames per second if you have the 3D off. It's actually pretty impressive. Aside from that, the multiplayer is okay at most, the voice acting is god-awful, and the gameplay is really nothing new. It's pretty meh at most. But, you know, it's still a pretty decent game, and I do recommend playing it at least once. Toki Tori. I haven't played much of this game at all. I only have it in my collection because it was only like 60 cents on the eShop. But, you know, I've heard some decent things about it. That's all I can say. Infinite Golf. This is one of the few eShop games that'll only work on new Nintendo 3DS. I'm not entirely sure why, because it's a pretty basic game. I don't see why it couldn't have worked on the regular 3DS models, but I don't like it all that much. It's kind of boring. Urban Trials Freestyle 2. In case you couldn't tell, it's a sequel to Urban Trials Freestyle 1. And, you know, from what I played, it's actually pretty fun. I don't know if it's part of the official Trials series or if it's just a Trials wannabe, but it's still a pretty good game. I do recommend it. Kirby's Extra Epic Yarn. Try and say that 5 times fast. This is only a demo version, but from what I played, it's a great port of the Wii version. As you can tell by the title, Kirby's Extra Epic Yarn adds extra content that wasn't in the original Wii version, such as a higher difficulty level, more levels to explore, and etc. And honestly, the game looks and runs really well in 3DS, surprisingly. Unfortunately, it does not support Stereoscopic 3D, which is kind of a letdown, but still, it's a great port. What can I say? This is one badass game. How could you not say no to bowling and zombies? Honestly, it's just too irresistible. This is a demo version, and I haven't played much of it, but from what I played, it's actually pretty fun. I do recommend it. Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney Spirits of Justice. I haven't played this demo version, nor have I played the full version, so yeah, unsurprisingly, I can't say anything about it. Mario Golf World Tour. From what I played from the demo version, this is actually a pretty good Mario Golf game. One of the better ones in the series. Give it a go. Metroid Prime Blast Ball. This is essentially the multiplayer portion of Metroid Prime Federation Force, which, if you know anything about Federation Force, it's a very polarizing Metroid Prime game, let me tell you that. I've only played Blast Ball with bots, but it's still hella fun. It's a lot like Rocket League, but with guns instead of cars. Give it a go. You're gonna have a good time. Resident Evil Revelations. I have not played this game, so again, can't say anything about it. Sorry. And finally, we have Hey Pikmin, which is a very, very polarizing entry in the Pikmin series. I have only played about 5 minutes of this game, but that's really all I ever want to experience from this game ever. It's that bad. Don't recommend it at all. So showing off some gameplay here, the first thing I want to talk about is the circle pad, and honestly, it's really responsive. It's a lot like the PSP's little analog nub, where it's not technically a full-sized analog stick, but rather it's like a little nub that basically rotates over some sort of mechanism. It works really, really well, and honestly, there's barely any dead zone to it whatsoever, which is always a good thing. Even in 2021, the Stereoscopic 3D is still very impressive. So, unfortunately, I can't really capture it on camera, but here's what the 3D looks like all the way up. As you can see, it well, it doesn't have the same effect on camera, unfortunately, but you'll have to take my word for it. It is quite impressive, especially on the new Nintendo 3DS with that super stable 3D. It is really, really nice. I really like the larger screens on the XL models of 3DSs. As I stated before, I originally wanted to go with a normal size 3DS, but honestly, after using the XL model, it is really, really nice to have those bigger screens. You can definitely see the graphical details a lot better with those bigger screens. It is quite nice. The face buttons are also quite responsive too. Even though they are the clicky style buttons, which I'm not a huge fan of, you know, they're still responsive, and that's the most important thing. I would rather have clicky buttons that are actually responsive than buttons that, you know, aren't responsive. The speakers also sound pretty decent and actually get quite loud. As you can see, that's the loudest that the speakers get. And honestly, it gets pretty loud. The only problem I have with the speakers is that they do sound a little muffly, and even playing games through the headphone jack, it still sounds a little on the muffled side. I'm not entirely sure if that has something to do with 3DS's audio chip, but it is what it is. Let's talk about the new Nintendo 3DS features by showing off a game like Ironfall Invasion here. The second analog stick, as I said before, it works a lot like the IBM track points back from the early 90s. The movement is determined by how hard you press on the analog stick. And honestly, it's really responsive. I quite like it. It doesn't quite feel the same way as a regular analog stick. And a lot of people really wish that they would have just put an additional circle pad, which Nintendo did make an accessory that attached to the bottom of the system that gave you a second circle pad. But, you know, it's nice to have one just integrated straight into the system. And luckily, as I said before, it's very responsive. One concern that people had when they first saw the new Nintendo 3DS is the placement of the second analog stick. And honestly, it doesn't get in the way at all, at least in my opinion. And luckily they put a little indentation right at the bottom of the screen hinge so that you can still close the system properly. So, that was the new Nintendo 3DS XL. I do think that its predecessor, the Nintendo DS, did make a bigger impact, but it's hard to deny that the 3DS is a damn fine system. With a slew of must-play titles and great features, it's no wonder why the 3DS had such a long lifespan, being discontinued only just last year in 2020. If you've never owned a 3DS before, this is the model to get. Unless, of course, you don't care about the 3D. In that case, go with the new Nintendo 2DS XL. Even though there's only a handful of titles that only work on the new line of 3DSs, like Xenoblade Chronicles 3D and Minecraft, it's still worth it to pick up one of these models because you'll be getting better performance in games that take advantage of the new line of 3DSs. Plus, you get a second analog stick. Can't argue with that. So, I think we're done here. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time. So the top screen will display icons depending on what you have highlighted on the bottom screen. God damn it. They're shoveling outside. Do they really have to do that now?